Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Understanding Traceability and the UNECE Traceability Guidelines. Today's presentation will be recorded and sent out to all registered participants and also will be posted on the Hub. We will have a Q&A portion throughout the presentation. You can type your questions into the question box on the webinar doc. Any unanswered questions will be answered afterward via email. I now turn it over to Nicole with Textile Exchange. Nicole?
Thank you very much, Rose, and welcome everyone. My name is Nicole Lambert, and I am very pleased on behalf of Textile Exchange and the Responsible Leather Roundtable to be hosting this webinar on traceability in the leather supply chain. Just before we start, we'll go through our antitrust statement. So Textile Exchange convenes the textile community and values diversity of views, expertise, opinions, backgrounds, and experiences. It is expected that members of this community will collaborate by sharing ideas, information, and resources of publicly available information only, and avoid discussion on prices, strategic plans, and other private and sensitive information. I'll move on to our disclaimer that I'll let you read. And basically, the views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this webinar belong solely to the speakers. And as the leader of the Responsible Leather Roundtable, Textile Exchange strives to maintain a neutral role. Thank you so much for being with us today. We're expecting quite a few people. As Rose mentioned at the beginning, this webinar will be recorded and the presentation will also be made available for you on our website, and all of that will be sent in our communications. Traceability. Traceability is a topic that attracts a lot of attention, and this is particularly true when it comes to leather, where traceability appears to be often a very challenging topic to handle. And there are important sustainability challenges along the leather supply chain. For example, at the farm level, we have animal welfare risks and deforestation. In the leather production level, we have numerous environmental and social challenges. And all of these risks are complicated to manage in an effective way without visibility on one's supply chain and a robust traceability system in place. And so all of this leads to serious reputational risks for a brand that is sitting on the end of that supply chain. So this brings me to the series of webinars we have scheduled for you throughout May and June. So initially, to tell you the truth, we had actually planned for 2 webinars, and our 2 webinars have now extended to 5 webinars on the topic of traceability in the leather supply chain. And so here you have an overview of what to expect in the coming months. So our first webinar is today and on understanding traceability and the UNECE guidelines. Our next webinar, which is scheduled for May 20th, will be on traceability expectations of sustainability standards in the leather supply chain. And so we have four sustainability standards that we'll be presenting. Our third webinar will be focused on traceability solution providers in the leather supply chain. So different solution providers will be presenting the technologies and the systems that they have created and designed and that are currently also being trialed or used already in the leather supply chain. Our fourth webinar is quite an exciting one. It's a joint webinar with NWF and the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, and more specifically the Brazilian Roundtable. And so this webinar will be focused on traceability at the farm level with a specific focus on what's happening in Brazil at the moment. And our last webinar will be on brand experience around the implementation of traceability solutions in the leather supply chain. And so that will be June 8th. So we'll be sending out communications about these webinars, and you can also find the links to register for the webinars on our Responsible Leather Roundtable website. So just before we kick off, so the house rules, you are automatically put on mute. And if you have questions, please use the Q&A box, which you will find on the Zoom toolbar. And you can be asking questions throughout the session, and we will have a Q&A session at the end. So today's speakers includes myself. I'm working for Textile Exchange, and I've been working closely with Anne and the different members of the LEA team to develop the Leather Impact Accelerator. Josefina, who is working for the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, but also for Textile Exchange. She's a bit of our secret weapon, connecting us to the farm or the beef industry and helping us always consider the reality of what is happening on the ground at the farm level. Then we have Deborah, who I probably do not need to introduce to anyone, but Deborah is a UN consultant working with the UNECE on the guidelines. And she is also the founder and managing director of the Sustainable Leather Foundation. And finally, we have Callie Weldon, Textile Exchange employee, who is a standards specialist. So exciting panel today. Our webinar, our first webinar has the following agenda. So we'll kick off with Callie, who will be giving us an introduction to traceability. What is traceability and how it can be addressed in the supply chain? Then Josefina will be giving us an overview of some of the major challenges of traceability at the farm level. And she will be, and it's quite exciting, she'll be providing us with some insights into the diversity of legal requirements relative to traceability in different countries. And finally, Deborah will be giving us a deep dive into the work carried out by the UNECE on traceability in the leather supply chain. And then we will end with a Q&A session. So we have quite a dense agenda for today. So without any further ado, I will hand the floor to Callie. I'll let you take over.
Thanks, Nicole. Hi, everybody. My name is Callie Weldon. I work on the standards and integrity team at Textile Exchange as a standards specialist. And I've been with the organization for just about 2 years now. And apologies if there's any background noise. We are currently fostering a puppy and in the middle of moving. So a little bit crazy over here, but yeah, hopefully it's not too loud in the background. So we can forward to the next slide, Nicole. And you can go through to the next animation. If you're familiar with Textile Exchange, you have most likely seen this slide before. It's really to illustrate that everybody's dream in the supply chain is that, sourcing is very straightforward. There's a direct connection. The retailer has visibility to everything that's going on, when in reality, we know that it's much more complicated than that. There's a lot of different sites involved, suppliers involved, especially in the leather supply chain, knowing this is extremely complex. So I'm just going to talk about some options for visibility and kind of frame what traceability means to both Textile Exchange and the industry at large with a complex supply chain. So what is traceability? This is the ICL definition for traceability, that it's the ability to verify the history, location, or the application of an item by the means of a documented record or recorded identification. So this is really broad. This is a really broad definition, and it can be any part of the supply chain. So this doesn't necessarily mean that it's a sequential tracing of each site, but it's a vantage point into where the parts and pieces of your item are coming from. And you can advance to the next animation here. So traceability is not chain of custody. Chain of custody is that sequential ownership, meaning that we know when the good or the item or the material is being transferred from one custodian to another in the supply chain. And this, again, is coming from the ICL definition. So the key function of a traceability system is really to collect and maintain data on product characteristics and then trace that data along a supply chain. The fundamental differences between a chain of custody model and the traceability system is it really lies in the handling or the tracking of the physical product versus the handling and the tracking of the associated data. So why would you aim for traceability in your supply chain? I think my colleagues are going to go into more detail about the leather supply chain specifically, but you can advance to the next slide. So traceability in your supply chain supports the integrity of the product that you're offering. A traceability system allows you to identify risk areas. You can protect your reputational risk within certain hotspots. It can allow agility in your team for problem solving, and it can help you deliver on sustainability goals. It really provides an opportunity to look at broad aspects. So you can look at supply chain efficiencies, you can dive into some parts of regulatory requirements, and I think most enticingly, but not most importantly, you can storytell about the product by connecting with the actors upstream in your supply chain. All that being said, traceability is the backbone of a sustainable product system, but traceability alone doesn't provide this verification. So a traceability system is really needed to follow the trail of the product or the parts or the materials that are coming from the supplier and being processed into a finished good. And so a traceability system, there's a lot of different options, and there's a lot of different companies and models that are designed to be fit for purpose. So I'm going to go over just a few options that you may have heard of. So we can advance. So there's different types of tracers. When we talk about what actually is traceability, there's a lot of models floating around, and they're different than the traditional chain of custody model, which you might have seen if you're involved with any of our standards, which I'll talk about in a moment. But these are different than a traditional chain of custody system. So you could have an in-product tracer, which is embedded into the product. This is like a DNA, a dye, a particle marker, and these can only be destroyed typically by destroying the actual product. You can't take this tracer out unless you destroy the product. Then we have on-product tracing, which is an RFID or a barcode that you could scan, and this is attached at the place of origin. All of these would be attached at the place of origin. And it essentially can be removed, but you would have to, provide, or you'd have to enforce physical force, or it would go through a chemical process to remove it. And then we have off-product identification, which again is placed at the place of origin, and this would be more a certificate or a digital trace that can easily be removed by taking the off-product label off the product. I won't get too detailed. These are more just examples for the slides for after for reference, but these are just some of the different companies. Often we get inquiries, oh, I've heard about this company, is this good, or where does this lie in the mapping of all of these different systems? So these are different examples of in-product tracers, and then we can advance to the on-product tracers, RFID and barcode solutions, and then finally off-product digital solutions. And I just wanted to note that blockchain is listed here as an off-product digital solution, just because we get a lot of questions about that. So this currently right now is classified as a traceability mechanism and not necessarily classic chain of custody for certification specifically. We can advance. So you might have seen this image. I believe this is an ICL chart, but I'll get into the chain of custody now. So chain of custody is something that Textile Exchange, with our standards, we use to provide a way to verify the claims you're making about a specific product. And I understand leather is very different. There's not necessarily an option for a specific model of chain of custody to be implemented, excuse me, across the whole board. But this is just for reference, to see what is out there for other types of models. So with the product segregation option, this model implies that the certified material and products throughout the supply chain are physically separated from each other. So there can be blending involved, excuse me, but there's never a blending of a certified material in that same material, the non-certified version. So this just ensures that certified and non-certified products are not mixed, and so that the end product can be verified to come from a certified source. customers know that 100% of their products will consist of certified materials, or you know, a certain percentage of the blend. We allow blending with our certifications in our segregation model. And again, not necessarily possible for leather, but this is just to frame what is possible with different models. Another commonly used model is the mass balance approach. With this mass balance model, certified and non-certified materials can be mixed in a very controlled way. And then the output of that mixture is a little bit different than the segregated model. So at the end, customers may not know whether their specific share of the product contains certified or non-certified material, or maybe it's a mixture of both, but there's the ability to make some sort of claim on containing certified material. And we can advance, thanks. And so as we mentioned, Textile Exchange, with our certification specifically, we follow a product segregation approach for a chain of custody. This is just to preserve the identity of the claimed material and track its movement. We do this through scope certificates and transaction certificates, which you know, may be available for parts of the leather supply chain, or you know, maybe not at all. But this this path is what we would use for our certifications that we have with down and wool, alpaca, etc. And then lastly, I just wanted to talk quickly about methods of verification. And this can be applied not only with, you can see the third party, we call out it being certification, but there's other models of verification that can be used. And you can also look at it, so this looks at it from the perspective of investment versus integrity, but you can put other indicators here, like you know, the level of risk or difficulty to achieve. But this specific chart, when we're looking at first party verification, this would be something like a self-report or a declaration. So the company or the farm or the organization is saying, we are declaring that we don't practice, or we do practice this sort of task or method or practice. That would be considered first party verification. Second party verification would be a company owned standard or a scheme that they have, like a code of conduct, and they're essentially auditing their own supply chain and being able to verify that certain aspects are not or are happening in their supply chain. And then again, third party, which is what we would consider to be an actual certification, is what Textile Exchange uses for our certification model, which is a third party assured. A professional party is hired to do an independent audit of the site, and they can actually provide that chain of custody and put the stamp on the label. And I think that is all for me for framing, but I'm going to stick around until the end for question and answer, and can dive into some of the framework questions if anyone has it, but I'll hand it off to Josefina now, I think.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And Josefina, I'll let you take over then.
Okay, thank you. Okay, hello everyone. Okay, yes, as I said, my name is Josefina Eisel. I am both the Regional Director for Latin America for the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, and I also work for Textile Exchange for the Responsible Leather Program, more focused on the farm level and the pilots phase. I'm based in Buenos Aires in Argentina. So first, I think Kelly has already covered a lot, but I want to just go a little bit through what does traceability mean and what is a traceability system. I think it's very important to know that traceability systems are designed to enable identification of the product and identification of any issue that is related to the quality, damage, or any deficiency that the product has. When we talk about traceability in livestock, in our case, this product is what we need to identify is the animal. And in case anything happened with that animal or that product, we can always take corrective measures and just go back in the supply chain to see what we can prevent in the future to avoid that issue or that problem to happen. So in the case of livestock, to really identify the animal is very important, or at least a group of animal, like a batch level identification, is very important. But that's not the only thing you need. You need to have the identification combined with a system. And in that system, you can put all different kind of data that will help to identify the different problems or issues that have happened along the supply chain. Next one, please. So which are the benefits of having a traceability system? Well, of course, you can have control of the process. You can correct any error. You can understand which is the origin of the product, who made it and how, and you can have information on the farm and all the things that happen in this case, for example, at farm level. You can really have more reliability on the value chain. You can understand really if it is a transparent supply chain, you can really see what happens at every layer of the chain. You can share information of any type. You can just input any type of information to the system. And of course, then you can do like a joint work between the production and the marketing. Next one, please. So why traceability in the case of livestock? Of course, when we talk about livestock, and in this case beef, like is food. So any food product, it has a lot of implication on health. So it all started with the traceability, with different concerns related to health. The consumers were starting also to be more conscious about what they were eating, about the origin of the product that they were eating. So it all started with health. The second step on traceability, and maybe which other concerns now, are more related to ethical concern. And that's when maybe the leather industry also has concern on traceability, more related to ethical things like, for example, deforestation, animal welfare, social concerns. Also, it can be like related to displacement on indigenous community, all different concerns that are more ethical, that has nothing to do with the quality or the nutrition of the product. So the concerns, also there is a lot of now different concerns related to the need of really eating beef, or it can be replaced with other plant-based foods. So the consumers now are evolving into different phases, and the traceability can really respond many of these questions that the consumers are having right now. Next one, please. So traceability in Latin America, how the traceability systems that we have now in place started, it was with the different regulations from the European Union, mainly related to different problems, for example, with the foot and mouth disease, with later on with the bovine, with the BSE, which is called. So it mainly started with all the different regulations that European Union had, that any product could be exported to the European Commission if it didn't have a traceability system, and could really understand if there was any problem more related to sanitary issues, to health issues. So it all started with a batch level, with kind of group level traceability, and now all the beef that goes to Europe has traceability at individual animal. Next one, please. So I'm going to go a little bit in detail of the different systems that we have in 4 countries in South America. First is Argentina. So Argentina has individual animal traceability at national levels. All the animals can be identified individually. That changed over the last 5 or 6 years, that really they made a slow process into having identified every single animal. So every farm in Argentina needs to be registered in a system that is called RENSPA. So they need to put information on the number of animals, on the different species that they have. It's not only livestock, but all different animals that they have, crops and everything. But they don't need to register any environmental information or any social information. It's more information related to stocks and to sanitary requirements. So what is all the animals, as I said, they have like a ear tag, a yellow ear tag with a PUC number. It's a unique number for each animal. So every time they move an animal from a farm to a different farm or to a slaughterhouse, they need to register that movement. There are different documents that every time that you move animals, and that the farmers need to identify, that there are transit documents, like there is a system that is called the SIGSA, that again, it's at the SENASA, which is the National Sanitary Service. And also the farmer needs to register how many animals they have in stock at the farm, how many animals have died. So they need to do very often reports of what's happening at farm level. But none of this information has any environmental or animal welfare information. It's mainly for sanitary purposes. So, and another thing on the current Argentine system is that there is a lot of information is clustered into different databases. So there is no system such as blockchain that can really use the information for different purposes. So if there is a sanitary problem, you go to the SENASA database and to the SIGSA and all this, and you can identify the problem. But if there is no, a lot of information is not cross on different systems. Another thing is like, as there is no environmental information, if there is land that has been illegally deforested, they can still produce, they can still have livestock in that farm. So there is no control on any kind of environmental information and trading in the Argentine system. The good thing is that at least on the sanitary requirements, there is full individual animal level traceability, which has been a really big step for the Argentine production. Next one, please. I'm gonna go to Brazil. Can I just go to the next one, which is just, in Brazil, we have a very similar situation. We have two different systems. We have a system for the EU, and we have the system that goes just for the local consumption of two other markets that are not maybe as strict as the EU. So all farms in Brazil, they had to be registered at the CAR. CAR is a system that every single farm in Brazil, they need to register, and they need to it's like an environmental register, and also information on stocks and everything that happens at farm level. But the thing is, like, only the animals that goes to the EU, they have the ear tag identification at individual level. So every animal, they have a very similar identification, that ear tag, and if they go to EU, they have individual animal traceability. But this only covers a very small portion of the Brazilian herd. So the individual animal traceability in Brazil is still very small, and it's mainly for the ones that are animals that go into the EU. To really implement this at national level, it has a very high cost. So what's happening in Brazil? Most of the animals, they have the farms are registered at the CAR, and the animals, every time you move an animal, you need to use an animal transit guide. But in this case, there's the only way where you can have traceability is at batch level, because none of the animals are not identified. So in this case, you just can only track animals at batch level. Next one, please. What could be a possible solution for Brazil? If you have in Brazil, if you have the GTA, that is the transport document, you have the CAR, which is all the information on the farm, and you can also use the PRODES. The PRODES is the system that the Brazilian government has to monitor deforestation. So what a system could like a useful system for Brazil could be, using, for example, blockchain or other tools, would be to have all these three systems combined with the PRODES. So in this case, you can really track animals. At least it would be at batch level, but at least you can only mix animals that they have been born in an area where there is no deforestation, and you can check that with the PRODES. And also it's very much cost effective than if you have an ear tag. The ear tags, they have a cost, and in many countries the producer has to afford that cost, and usually the herds in Brazil are very large. So one example of a system that really combines all these different systems is BCPEC. That's a tool that using blockchain, they can just verify information at batch level on every single movement of the animal, and you can also monitor if there has been any deforestation and any kind of social issue happening on that supply chain. Next one, please. In the case of Paraguay, Paraguay is a very similar example to the rest. There are the system for the animals that go to the European Union and the ones to the beef that mainly goes to the European Union and the rest. So you have the SIGO, the information that it used at batch level. So all the animals, you can have information on batch level, on sanitary requirements from the farm to slaughter, but only at batch level. Whereas if the animals that go to EU, you have another system that is called CITRAP, that you can have information again only on sanitary issues at individual animal. But this system also is not combined with any deforestation or social information system. It's just mainly a system that was designed for the EU. Next one, please. So these are the two systems that Uruguay has. So this is the SIGO that is just for, as I said, very basic information for health emergency that is managed by SENAXA, which is the sanitary service. And then you have this individual traceability that also is for sanitary with very specific information, but with no environmental information. Next one, please. And the system that is really very complete that everybody in Latin America looks at is the system in Uruguay, that it really has traceability from farm to fork. So when a farmer needs to register its farm, it just needs to put all different information, not only related to breeds, genetics, but also land use. So anything that happens at the environmental level of the farm and on what different crops, whatever that farmer does in the farm, that's registered. And through the SIRA, through the system that really identify all the different movements, you can track anything that has happened on the beef, like on the different movements from farm to farm or to the slaughter, and even at the end to the product level. You can go back in the system and you can track any kind of information. All this system was paid by the Uruguayan government, so it was covered so there is no cost for the producer to really implement the system. And it includes, as I said, environmental, animal welfare, any type of information. And it's not only that they have the ear tags, but they also have chips. So every information is online at the same moment where you make a movement, all the information goes online and you can just check what's going on online. So this is kind of the best developed system in the region.
Josefina, we're going to have to, hurry up a bit because we have a few
Yeah,
other...
that is the last one.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So just as a conclusion, the only countries that has individual animal traceability are Uruguay and Argentina. All the rest are at batch level. The cost of the traceability systems usually is high, and usually, as I said, the only government that is covering that cost is the one in Uruguay. In the rest, all the producers have to pay, and not all of them are willing really to pay the cost. As I said, there is no social, environmental, or animal welfare information. Only there is full traceability when there is a specific market that requirement any social environmental traceability is more than a private level. And many traceability systems, I think it's important, and mainly still paper-based. There is no like IT information that really is registering all these movements of animals. So there's still a lot of area for improvement. So that's it.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Sorry, yeah, so we're just going to change a little bit the agenda, and we'll have Deborah take over now. I will introduce you to the traceability components of LEA at the very end. So Deborah, I'll let you take over from here.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to try and whistle through this for you. So first of all, I just want to say thank you for giving us the opportunity to contribute to the webinar. It is great to be able to share this work with you. As you all know, it's about traceability and transparency in garment and footwear value chains, and really about harnessing the potential of advanced technologies such as blockchain for sustainability and responsible consumption. And it's in line with the 2030 United Nations agenda. And as you can see from this slide here, I'm going to take you through the key milestones to date, from creation of the policy recommendations and guidelines, right through to piloting, training and communication, which is where we're at now. And just to give you an indication, last week we gave a full project update at the 36th UN CFACT Forum, with each of the Secretariat and project consultants giving their own update presentations on each of these topics. It took 2.5 hours. So I'm going to try and condense that down into what was going to be 20 minutes, but I'm going to try and keep that down to 15 now, I think. No small task. So if I whistle through a bit and you want some more information, just feel free to reach out and we can give you more details afterwards. So if we go to the next slide, first of all, why the garment and footwear industry? Well, as you all know, you'll be very well aware, it's one of the biggest industries, and its production facilities are situated all around the world, with more than half of them being SMEs. And alongside that, the impacts and risks are well documented for the environment, for workers around the world, and for our health. So we want to flag two elements here as a backdrop to this work. It's a particularly challenging sector. And the first is the consumer's increasing demand for ethically sourced products, traceability of origin, we've talked about that already today, compliance with social, health and safety and environmental standards. But consumers don't always fully trust the claims that are being made currently, and that's a key challenge. And the second one is governmental and civil society raising attention to responsible business conduct across the whole value chain. The EU is working on legislation to advance human rights and environmental due diligence in key industry sectors like garments and footwear, so it's really important. And how does this relate to a traceability system? Well, it's becoming a standard tool for assessing that risk management, both from a business perspective, but also from a responsible consumer perspective. And it's clear that in order to be successful, we need a coordinated action at different levels to provide this risk management in a standardized way, because we can't do it alone. It's got to be a collective action. And so that's the purpose of the UN project, really. And this is the toolbox that you can see here on this slide. The policy recommendation and the guidelines, they're in place now, and we've worked hard on those. They identify the key measures to be put in place in terms of the norms and the standards. Second, for decision makers at company level, we've got the information exchange standard that maps the processes, the actors, the information that we want to trace along that value chain so that everybody's speaking the same language. And then thirdly, for industry actors, including certification bodies, that's where we start piloting the blockchain environment and how we can work with all those different areas to bring it together into a technology such as blockchain. So the toolbox has been developed through wide consultation, support of many, many external experts. I think we have about 200 experts now in the wider group, and representing more than 190,000 companies globally. That's quite significant. And if we move to the next slide, the first part of the toolbox is now complete. And just on the 19th to 21st of April, at the 27th UN CFACT plenary session, the policy recommendations and guidelines were formally adopted by the member states. And the call to action, which we'll talk about in just a moment, was formally endorsed. So the executive summary for policymakers and the policy brief on the blockchain technology were both presented at that plenary session. And all of this represents significant milestones in the work that we've been doing over the last year. And it was a full year's work of a great team of people. And next slide. So I just touched on the call to action. This is a call for industry actors to pledge their support to the project and formally document how they plan to implement more sustainable practices through traceability and transparency. So the 10th of May, the letter will go out to actors inviting them to submit their pledges. And we're asking for organisations to send those pledges back in by the 10th of September at the latest. And there's information and the links to all of this are on the project page, and that's on the last slide of this presentation deck. After that, we'll present those pledges at 21st of September. So that's just the call to action. Please ask if you want more information on that. And if we go to the next slide, how did we do this? What approach do we have and how are we going about it? We had to create some business process analyses for the textile value chain and for the leather value chain. They both use the same methodology, but they're applied to the different processes and different materials that are being used within those different value chains. There were three key things to do: identify the processes and the actors, then identify the risks, and then identify the data and the information exchanges that are required. All three steps in this methodology looked at what exists now and also what do we need? Have we got any gaps, and what do we need to do? Within the work, we very much drew upon the OECD due diligence guidelines and the ITC sustainability map, because key to the work that we're doing was a desire not to reinvent the wheel. And if we already had really good cases out there, standards out there, then we would adopt those. So we've identified the common sustainability criteria from more than 200 international relevant standards to ensure that interoperability exists with what's already there in the existing standards. And if we move to the next slide, I'll talk about it in just a little bit more detail. So you can see here, the blue at the top, that's the cotton value chain, and the brown at the bottom is the leather value chain. So it was the same principle for both. We first of all identified out the processes that take place within those value chains and the actors who perform those processes directly or indirectly. It's worth remembering that not every value chain will always follow this exact process flow, but we had to try to find the broadest acceptable value chain processes, recognizing that some of them may have fewer steps and others may be more complex. But in order to find a set of harmonized parameters, we looked at the most commonly accepted process flows for the basis of the work. And this process was peer reviewed by industry experts who gave comment and feedback before we published. And if we go to the next slide, once that work was done, we then had to look at the risks. This slide shows two types of risks. So you've got your value chain in the middle, and it could be any textile or leather. The risks at the top are specific to certain parts of the process, but they may not apply to all processes. So for example, the deforestation and biodiversity are very much at the upstream end. The air pollution, water pollution, hazardous chemistry, those are very definitely part of the main production processes. The risks at the bottom of the chart here, they're the risks that do apply across the whole value chain. So right the way across, we'll have greenhouse gas emissions, human rights, labour risks, water use, energy. So they're consistent across. And once we'd created the risk profile, we then looked at what already exists in the industries to mitigate those risks. So what certification standards have we got out there already? What regulation have we got in place already that mitigates those risks? And then if we move to the next slide, The third part of the process was to then consider the data requirements. So what information should be recorded, in what way, and how should that information be transferred between parties in order to create a robust traceability system that also allows for those sustainability claims to be verified along the way. And things that were important to look at during this stage were different entry and exit points that need to be allowed for. Not every value chain is going to be able to go right back to the farm. So you have to recognize that some entry points could be at the slaughter facility, some may be at the first tannery. And you'll also have different exit points. Some may only be going to finished leather, some may be going right out to finished article or product. So we had to take that into account. And also interoperability. Not doing something within what we're trying to create that would create new obstacles to adoption of this in less advanced countries. So we didn't want to inadvertently create a whole new problem. So it has to be interoperable and something that will work consistently on a manual basis or on a highly technological basis. We also looked at what gaps exist. So what was very clear was that there isn't one system that will provide traceability from the farm through to the finished product. There are a series of different systems that if you link them together could do that for you, but there isn't one thing that can consistently take you from start to finish yet. And so that's going to be a key challenge for the future, I think. So next slide, please. The culmination of that part of the work was two reports, one for the leather value chain and one for the textile value chain. The leather report is complete. That was presented at the plenary last month. The textile report is just being finished now. And just to put it into context, that leather report is over 300 pages long. So it's a very detailed document. And it works on a number of levels. Some parts of that report will be very technical, very data-driven. Some parts will be a bit more policy and a bit more top-end, but it is a very in-depth report. And as I say, the textile report is just being finalized now. And this work has underpinned the other areas of the project that I'm going to really briefly take you through. The work of the data identifiers and the code lists, and also the work of the blockchain pilot. So if we move on to the next slide, why do we need data identifiers and code lists? They're an essential part because when we're thinking about machine to machine, we have to have that standardized set of information. And within the UN, there is a core component library that has hundreds of thousands of entries in it for all different industries. And what we need to do is make sure that the data that we're saying are needed for transparency and traceability in the garment and footwear sectors is consistent with other data forms that are already being used. So it's really important that we have standard, consistent information to alleviate that ambiguity. And if we look at the next slide really briefly, I mean, the work that's been done here by one of the experts, Gerhard, is so detailed. And since January, I've spent 3 hours every Wednesday working with him and the rest of the team on the core component library to harmonize the data and to look at every single term and every single description and make sure that it's really right. But it's really important because those code lists and those identifiers have to match up with those data components to give us the correct messages that will allow that really clear, concise understanding of claims for the consumers. Hundreds of hours of work has gone into this. I'm not going to go through this in great detail because I'm not the most advanced data technologist. So, and as I say, Gerhard has worked really hard on it. But just to give you a really brief example, one of the terms that we discussed quite a lot was transport waste. What was the definition of transport waste? Is it the waste that's arising from the transportation itself? Or is it the waste materials used to transport the articles like packaging and so forth? So it's really important that the context of the terminology is understood to alleviate that ambiguity. And if we go on to the next slide, I'm going to talk quickly about the blockchain pilot. So we're just embarking on this now. The cotton blockchain pilot started last year with the really heavy technical end, setting up the blockchain system itself, working with SUPSI University to create that platform of work. So the development and the infrastructure has taken a lot of time through the back end of 2020 and into the first part of 2021. The cotton blockchain is in the testing period right now, and we're hoping that that pilot run is going to start this month. So we're really at that pivotal point there. And at the same time, at the beginning of this year, we then started conceptualizing what the leather pilot would look like. A little bit easier for us because we've been able to learn a little bit from what's gone before with the cotton blockchain pilot. But this is where we're at right now. The pilots are going to run through the rest of this year and into 2022. Once we're finished with the cotton and the leather, the intention is to try to replicate that for other synthetic and natural fibers in textile. And if we go to the next slide, I'm just going to run you through this really quickly. I'm conscious of time now. Looking at the leather value chain, the first part of the process is for the project partners that are taking part in this pilot with us, is to identify out their value chain, looking at who their extended value chain would be, what components and articles they want to use for this pilot, because it might just be one product, or it might be a product range, but it could just be one single article. And then look at how they build out that value chain through their manufacturers and tanneries and traders to build up the wider partners. And then if we go to the next slide, step 2 after that is then to identify the information exchanges with that wider value chain. So what information do they need to get from their partners? We worked on the 5 W's here: who, what, why, where, and when. And we also use the how in there, you'll see at that why part. But it's really important that we have standard data collected in a standard way by all of these partners that come on board as part of the pilot. Next slide, please. Rushing through now. And then the next step.
Deborah, don't worry too much. You can take another 3-4 minutes. It's fine.
Well, the next step after that, once you know what articles you're using, who your value chain is, you then identify your user story. So what do you want to achieve as a pilot partner? As a brand involved in this, what's the messaging that you want to be? Or as the tannery involved in this, where do you position yourself within that leather value chain? Who are your most relevant partners in that value chain? And how does it impact on the chain as a whole, the business that you do? And if you go to the next slide, it's a quick example of a user story. And if you just look at the bottom one there, as a leather manufacturer, you want to ensure that your leather manufacture does not contain hazardous chemistry. So how do you do that? Use REACH regulations. And why are you doing that? You're doing that so that no adverse health effects are suffered by people who use or wear your products. And that's a very simple overview of what a user story could be. And you could build that around any kind of sustainability claim that you would like to make within your part of the value chain. And if you go to the next slide, how that then works is, this is an example. And we're just using the simple example of origin right now. And we're using the change of ownership of material within the tanning process from a wet blue tannery to a finishing tannery. So it's being moved from stage 5 to stage 6 in our overall value chain. And what do we want to do? So we know who it is. It's tannery ABC going to tannery XYZ. And what is it? Well, the event has now been tanned. We know what material it is. We know what the verification evidence is. And now we need to pass it to the second tannery. So we want to record the date and time. And why are we doing it? To continue the process, to continue that leather manufacture. Now, in this example, then the evidence would be the invoicing and the shipping documentation, because it's just a switch of ownership. And so this public disclosure level would be business to business. It's quite a simple transaction, but it shows you kind of the process, and you pick where you are in that value chain and decide accordingly on what you need to verify. And if we move on, this is just really a quick wrap up here, that we're breaking this work down into working groups. We'll have a scoping group, which will be made up of the direct partners. We'll have a support group, which will be made up of the associations like WWF or COTANS, for example. And then you have your validation partners made up of the certification companies and the people that will actually provide the validation of the claims. Next slide, Nicole. Okay, training plan, capacity building. You'll see all of this when you get your deck, but we're organizing 6 workshops. Each of the workshops will be 3 days in duration, different areas around the globe, as you can see there. The first one in September to coincide with Fashion Week. And these workshops will be split into modules that are geared towards different levels of work. So some will be for the decision makers, some will be for the implementers at operational level, some will be for the IT teams. So there'll be different modules for different parts of an organization. We won't expect the same person to be attending all 3 days for all modules. Next slide, almost there. And then finally, project communication. So we're now working on an identity for the project proper. You can see there's 2 options at the bottom there. There's a strap line of track it, trace it, wear it, and some treatments of a logo that you can see there. There's a sustainability pledge that we've now launched to go alongside the call to action. And there's a whole now increased effort around communication, capacity building, training, and getting the information out there. And then I think the next slide is just my concluding one, Nicole. So over to you. Sorry, that was really fast, but hopefully you followed that with me okay. And please reach out if you want any more information.
Thank you so much, Deborah. That was fantastic. And I'm sorry you didn't get as much time as was planned initially, but that was really interesting. I definitely want to learn more. And I'm also daunting those 300 pages of that report, but I think it will be a great document to go through. Well, actually, really, we've got 3 minutes left. And I think what we're going to do is we're actually going to take on the questions now before we close. And so I can see there's already 2 questions here. And please continue adding in your questions now as well. So the first question is, how does the traceability system look in other countries like China, India, and Bangladesh? So is that, oh yeah, that's relative, I'm guessing, to the farm level. Josefina, do you want to maybe say something about that?
Honestly, I don't have specific information about those 3 countries, but I can tell you that most of the traceability systems that are in place they have this kind of sanitary controls that are mainly designed to control any kind of disease, so that the animals are vaccinated or not. So that's usually the gap with all the traceability systems, that they're not linked to other database that usually the government has related to land use change or like animal welfare or social issues. So I can imagine that those systems are again related to the control of diseases like sanitary restrictions.
Thank you. And maybe we can look more into that as well, Erica, and get back to you a bit later on. Another question is, the targets mentions garments and footwear. Will this encompass other areas such as accessories? Deborah, I'm guessing that's for you.
Yes, yeah, we had lots of other areas wanting to be involved in the project, but it would become too unwieldy if we tried to encompass all of those. So yes, it will include particularly for textile and leather accessories as well. But the objective and aim is that what we're doing will be something that can be applied to other industry types. Although we're basing it on garment and footwear, it can be adopted by other industry. Yeah.
Thank you. And we have one last question that is a very broad one, and maybe Deborah, you can just close on that as well, is how can we improve traceability in the garment manufacturing sector? Which is very, very broad, but maybe you have some input on the work you have with the UNECE.
It is, and I think that's an evolving thing. I mean, what I would say to everybody is that the first thing to do is to know where you are now, so to understand what your supply chain is to begin with, and then to assess where there might be areas of opaqueness within that supply chain, so that you can start looking at it. But it will be evolving, and certainly we're hoping to extend out. The garment manufacturing end is one of the lesser known ends in the value chain that we're doing with the leather value chain. Definitely, I think perhaps more control for some of the other textiles, but it's certainly something that we're looking at closely, along with post-consumption and circularity. Actually, that should be mentioned as well.
Thank you so much, Deborah, and thank you to all our speakers, Kelly and Josefina as well. This was fantastic. There are a few questions that have just arrived. Unfortunately, we're at the top of the hour now, and we'll probably be kicked out of the Zoom now. But I wanted to thank everyone for participating today, and we will follow up with your questions offline. Please come and join us for our next webinar, which is scheduled May 20th, and we'll be looking at traceability requirements and expectations of sustainability standards used in the leather supply chain. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a lovely day, evening. Yes, thank you.
Thank you to our speakers, and thank you for participating in today's webinar. Again, as a friendly reminder, an email will be sent to all registered participants with a link to today's presentation. That concludes our webinar. Thank you. Goodbye.